Gaithersburg, Maryland, in the Indoor Air Quality and Ventilation Group. And I'll start with a disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by me are not necessarily reflective of the initiative of the United States government. But I'd also like to express some views to other disclaimers to the community. Jose maybe expressed some of these views in his previous talk, but I just want to say we think that 222 could be a valuable airborne pathogen transmission mitigation tool. But we acknowledge that there are some air quality challenges that we're taking very seriously, like when we do this research, and so I hope that's communicated. Additionally, the study that I'm going to be showing here is not necessarily representative of other restroom installations of 222. And importantly, we don't choose the air we breathe, some more than others, and deciding what air others may breathe is huge responsibility. Okay, so the fun stuff. We did this study last year after ICFUST 2023. I was inspired by some of the presentations looking at 222 installations in a restroom. I came back to NIST and entered our restroom. And I found that the mechanical ventilation system was broken. And what they had done is they installed these fragrant urinal screens. So that's what I'm showing there in the orange box. And when I say fragrant, they're emitting a lot of these ozone-reactive compounds. So it's like an incredibly miserable place to be. So I said, okay, this would be a fantastic place to look at some of these potential air quality implications. This is a peer-reviewed study, so you could scan the QR code if you're interested, and those are my co-authors down in the corner. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, I was inspired by some of the presentations I saw about 222 being a possible application in restrooms for reasons, it's a non-behavior mitigation strategy. And so I'm showing the, where's the clicker here? Okay. So yeah, this is the CAD drawing of the bathroom. We had 3 lamps, these 222 lamps positioned like this. And then we also had a particle measuring instrument in the bathroom, so we're able to measure particle byproducts from ozone chemistry. And like I mentioned, the ventilation was broken in the restroom. So that created some unique circumstances. Having 3 lamps in the bathroom, this created a room average fluence rate of about 3 microwatts per centimeter squared, so I recognize it's on the high end of maybe a typical installation. But some other important aspects of these experiments were that on the first weekend, the ventilation was broken, so we had an interchange of about 1 per hour. And then the second weekend, we asked facilities to fix the ventilation motor, and we had an interchange rate of about 2 per hour. These are some photos of the setup, and then this is our instrument command room with our fancy instrumentation measure, ozone chemistry byproducts. So I'm going to sit on this figure for a few slides, and this will be kind of the main part of the presentation, really, because it's described a lot of the interesting things that we saw in the restroom. So I want to point out some features of the legend, first of all. Up here, where you see purple along these vertical lines, that's when the 222 is on. And then next, so I'm showing time series here of different ozone and ozone chemistry byproducts. They'll appear as I talk about them more. On the y-axis, this is ozone concentration. I'm showing 2 different ozone concentrations. So one is the hallway concentration. This is the air was entering the restroom through the hallway. And this is the concentration of ozone in the restroom. The shaded areas represent 222 generated ozone. So by measuring the hallway air concentration, we were able to constrain the influence of ventilation on ozone in the restroom and separate out the contribution of 222 generated ozone. And ultimately, we measured steady-state gas phase concentrations increasing by about 5 ppb when we operated the lamps in there. Another point, we did use a mixing fan, so that's what these dotted black lines are. So look at perturbations of the chemistry. I'm not going to talk about that here, but it's in the manuscript, and I'd be happy to talk about it at another time. But an important point is that when we calculated ozone generation rates from the restroom measurements, they're quite similar to what we measured in the chamber. So the chamber isn't real. In my opinion, the chamber is a good estimation of what we would expect in real-world installations from indoor air quality perturbations. We were also able to measure nitrogen oxides, and nitrogen oxides, NO in particular, nitric oxide, is a really important reaction of ozone. And so you can kind of see that here. We have a plume of NO coming from some outside the source. The ozone concentrations go down, and so it's really important to measure some of these ancillary things when you're thinking about ozone in real spaces. And then finally, we did some intermittent use stuff. So we turn on the lamps for like 5 minutes, and then turn off for 15, 15, to simulate somebody coming into a stall and the lamp turning on. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that, but what we did see is that ozone was produced, and as well as some byproducts. Okay, so getting into the first set of byproducts that we measured, ozone chemistry byproducts that we measured, these are oxidized volatile organic compounds coming from ozone chemistry. And we measured a fair amount of them, but I grouped them into 3 general categories. One being aldehydes. So you can see this brown section here is aldehydes, so things like formaldehyde, other saturated aldehydes, non-al, things like that. As well as terpene oxidation products. So like I said, these fragrant internal streams were emitting ozone-reactive terpenes, and when those things oxidize in the gas phase, they can make gaseous oxidation products. We also measured the formation of other oxidized VOCs, things like acetic acid and acetone, that we're not necessarily concerned about from a health standpoint. But you can also see the increases in the VOC oxidation products here in the shaded area. The next category of byproducts that we measured are ultrafine particles. And so this red shaded area, you can see that every time we turn on the lamps, we get these bursts of really small particles. So ultrafine particles are particles that are less than 100 nanometers in diameter. And I pulled out, I focused on this one right here. You can see that background concentrations are looking about 5,000, and then we turn on the lamps, they jump up to about 15,000, so a factor of 3 increase. And then the particle dynamics are such that you get all these little small particles floating around and they come together and they make bigger particles, and that's called coagulation. And we're able to see some steady-state concentrations of ultrafine particles being generated in response to 222. The main point here is that these chemical reactions with the ozone and the ozone-reactive compounds are forming new particles. And these particles are so small that they can penetrate deep into the respiratory tract, representing a unique exposure hazard. And one of the things that we saw is that particles were anticipated to be posited in the respiratory tract, increased by 4-fold compared to background conditions when 222 was operated during this first week. And then finally, we observed the production of aerosol mass concentrations, micrograms per meter cubed. Otherwise, you can think of it as PM2.5. What we saw on average was about 2 micrograms per meter cubed. So we've had a lot of this 1 microgram per meter cubed, these low levels of aerosol concentrations being discussed. So this is something that we consider to be important, and then maximum concentration is about 2.5 micrograms per meter cubed. We have a really good understanding that the high concentrations of reactive terpenoid precursors in the restroom were responsible for generating this aerosol mass. But also because we had some high background aerosol concentrations, this also contributed condensable vapor reservoirs for which all these chemical reactions, they produce the sticky condensable vapors that turn into PM2.5. So that's a lot of data, and I kind of just want to quickly conceptually go through, summarize what we just saw. So in the restroom, we had the 222 lamps on, they were making the ozone. We had the VOCs from the urinal pads here. You can see all our friends. What we were able to do is map out the sinks of ozone. So we were able to say we measured the NO, and we know where that's going, and then we're able to measure the surface loss of ozone, and that can produce some byproducts here that we might be concerned about. But then also these VOC and ozone reactions can produce 2 types of oxidized volatile organic compounds, non-condensing and condensing gases. The condensing gases, they'll be lost to surfaces to some degree, but the ones that persist in the gas phase, they can nucleate particles, so your gases can form new particles. Those new particles can then come together, coagulate, and serve as condensation reservoirs for the condensable vapors formed from these reactions, or they can condense the pre-existing aerosol and you can form PM2.5. So that's kind of complicated. We did our best to go through in detail and really try and understand, convince ourselves that we understood the chemistry that was occurring whenever we were operating these lamps in the restroom. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail because Jose went over it, but one important thing to note is in background conditions in the restroom, we're looking at about 4 micrograms per meter cubed, and you can see how that relates to excess mortality on the y-axis here. If we turn on the 222, that moves us further up the curve. One of the things we were able to do in the restroom is we were able to take these measurements of PM2.5 and directly relate them to the measurements of the ozone loss from reactions with VOCs, also to background aerosol concentrations, and create a model to predict how much aerosol we would expect when you operate 222 in a certain space. So this is a potentially valuable data product from that study. I'm not going to go over pretty much any of this. I just want to say that when we increased the air change rate to 2 per hour, we saw less ozone oxidation products. I can talk about that more. But an important aspect of the study is that it was an unoccupied restroom. As Charlie mentioned, I think that we need to do We need to have more studies in occupied spaces because humans play an important role in the chemistry that occurs with ozone. So I'll leave this up here. I wanted to just point out that there are some common ideas that I've heard about unintended air byproducts from 222, and I have some suggestions for thinking about ozone chemistry and recommendations for measurements if this is something that you might find interesting in your own research as a report. So anyway, did I do it? Okay, good, nice.